Okay, thanks you guys for coming. I know it was not the best weather for going out in the world. I want to welcome you guys to Tradecraft and thank Brooklyn Research for hosting us. I'm Harriet Salmon. I am the host of a podcast, Craftsmanship, that partners with Brooklyn Research on Tradecraft, the talk series. And this is Ivin Ballen, and I'm going to let him introduce himself a little bit and his company. Tell us what he does.
Yes. So I've been a fabricator for about 15 years now, and I got into 3D scanning through working with artists about 3 to 4 years ago, and was very interested in it, and kind of the possibilities it offered, and also the way it kind of changed how I interacted with materials. There was a particular project where an artist needed an instant capture 3D scanner, this device that was kind of a unicorn, and
Unicorn in it that it didn't
really
exist.
We were looking to buy one and we couldn't
Yeah.
find one to buy. And I happen to have a friend, Ryan Paxton, who I guess is, if there was anyone to ask about how to build an instant capture 3D scanner, the first person came to mind was Ryan Paxton. And I called him up just to ask about it, and his response was, I want to build that.
Is he an artist as well?
And Ryan's an artist,
Okay.
also a fabricator, and we'd done a lot of work together over the years, doing, freelance artist projects and working at studios.
Could you talk a little bit, just because I know the
Mhm.
scanner is like a very specific
Yep.
piece of equipment that obviously didn't quite exist for purchase, but can you talk a bit about the kind of fabrication you were doing before
Yeah,
you were kind of called on that one project?
Yes. So, I started, like, my first passion, I actually would say, was mold making. And I was interested in that starting in college, and just the complexity and the material of it, and kind of an obsession with bronze. And just also just like the expansion of materials you could use, of taking one thing, sculpting it in clay and a soft material, and transitioning it to plaster. I spent a lot of years making my own work, and doing kind of trial and error, and and experimenting with materials, and totally analog. I mean, I've always been that way, and I still am that way with my own work.
You don't use any digital?
I don't use any digital in my own work at all.
Okay.
But I started working for the artist Matthew Day Jackson, and I'd worked for a couple of artists here and there before then, but in 2000, I think it was 2010, and Matt used everything and digital, and it was really interesting immediately for me just to see how somebody else works and utilizes 3D, digital modeling, digital cutting, digital carving, and analog processes. So, I mean, I'd say back then I was just observing it. It wasn't something that I was interested in even doing myself, but I like doing it. And I think that's also getting to the point of your podcast is that, I mean, I think one common theme is that all the people you've interviewed are people who like to make things for other people,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe themselves or maybe not. And I think that, of course, what you make yourself, is going to influence who you want to work with.
Yeah, everyone has said there's like a common thread that the conversation sooner or later turns to the fact that everyone I've interviewed enjoys solving problems.
Yes.
And fabrication is one of the places where you rarely have to deal with the same problem twice. So it's like a very, entertaining is the wrong word.
Yeah.
Satisfying with how complex and new the problems are.
Exactly. It's like Sudoku or something. I mean, it really is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's there's and it's all about adherence too. So it's like, how do I get one material to stick to another? Whether it's fasteners or glue, or using processes that make two things close enough together that they can, physically lock together.
I mean, how, like, hearing you talk about that kind of chapter of fabrication where it was like mold making and,
Mhm.
I mean, it is so much adherence, or like how not to make it fall over, or how to make it catalyze correctly, or all those
Mhm.
kind of logistical questions, those are very material based. But when I think about the company that you've started and the scanner that you've built, there's a materiality to it, but you're essentially doing file creation. Can you kind of talk, maybe it would be helpful to kind of talk through what you built.
Yes.
And what it does.
Yes. So what we built is it's a photogrammetry scanner, and we didn't invent the process of photogrammetry, but it's a process in which you take a series of images of an object, and you use existing software to basically use a lot of trigonometry to understand how that object manifests itself into a three-dimensional form.
Can I ask a very layman's question?
Yep.
When I first heard of it, the first visual, the like common cultural visual I had was
Mhm.
how they made the scene in the Matrix with the cameras going around. Is that a similar thing, or is that a not similar thing?
That is not a similar
Okay,
thing.
because that in my mind, when I see that,
Yes.
that's what I think. But it's different than photogrammetry.
Yes. So, in essence, it's a lot of cameras creating multiple shots, multiple screenshots at the same time,
Okay.
so that it's creating a similar amount of data, but it's using it differently.
Okay. Because
So
the
that's
Matrix thing, it's taking it in a sequence, so it looks like the camera is moving around.
exactly. So imagine, I have 20 videos on you, and they're all going at the same time. I can freeze frame, because all the frames are the same, and move around you in slow motion. It kind of creates visual effects. But with photogrammetry, you're kind of taking that data and you're like running it through a washing machine.
Okay.
And
Like a software washing?
yes,
machine?
yes, yeah.
Okay.
So, and there's like rules to it. Like there's
Yeah.
rules to any part of fabrication. I mean, that's why it's actually really similar to building things.
Is there, can we look at an image of all of the photographs, just so that?
Oh, yes. Okay, yeah, so there's a data set.
So a data set is all the pictures that are taken around?
Yes, so our rig it's 120 cameras, and they're all synchronized, and it takes one picture with just light, and I think there's an example of that, and then it takes one picture with a projected image on it, and the projected image is like a noise pattern. So that's just light right there, and then that's projection. So what the projection does is it gives some interference to any material on the subject, whatever it is, that a model can be made from. So in this case, we have just a random noise pattern that we made, and it works very well. And this way, if you're wearing a shirt that's white or blue or just doesn't have any pattern on it, it gives it some, we call it, texture, for lack of a better word, because that's going to get confusing down the line. But it gives it like a tooth, I would say.
So this is like a pattern that's just projected by a regular projector that
Yes.
helps pick up the definition
Yes,
of
exactly.
the person or whatever's in the scanner?
Exactly. So it's timed really close. So it's as fast as we can make it with the hardware. It's half a second in between a capture with light, and then half a second later it's a capture with the projection. So then what we do is we take that model with all the speckles all over it, or that photo set, and we put it into a program called Metashape, and we run.
That's the washing machine.
And that's the washing machine. And this is it right here. So you look on the right, there are all the photos, and 120 photos. And so what you're looking at here, it's a bit confusing, but hang in there. First, what we're doing is we're figuring out where all the cameras are in space. That's the most important part. So those blue squares that are surrounding, each one of those represents a camera. And we're just basically, the program is just figuring that out on its own through math. And once you know where the cameras are, you can generate what's called a dense cloud, which is every single point, I believe that 3 or more cameras recognizes as the same. So it could just be like It could be whatever. It could be your iris, for instance, you know. It will be a point in space, in three-dimensional space. So you get enough cross-reference, you get a bunch of points. And then that's called a dense cloud. So then you've got a couple million points that make a person. And then what you do...
You need 3 cameras to identify and agree on where...
I'm kind of making that up. I actually don't know if it's 3, but I assume it's 3. Yeah.
There needs to be agreement between
Yes.
the things to figure out where that button is
Yes.
in 3-dimensional, because you're looking at 2-dimensional photographs.
Yes, and they're cross-referencing all from each other. Like, so how the pattern kind of changes in space, you know.
This is so you know where these cameras are in space. Can you move where they are? Can you expand
Yes,
that
so
way?
this is the thing with photogrammetry. It's like there's an ideal and an optimal, but it's very flexible. The cameras don't have to be in a certain location. They just, it's like you're really just dealing with photography here. And you want clean, even lighting, good coverage, projection, because you have to remember down the line, when you have a 3D model, that's the great thing about a 3D model is you can light it any way you want. You just want a really nice, even texture. So we just flood it with a crazy amount of light and try to eliminate any shadows whatsoever. So then you get the dense cloud, and then you actually turn that into a polygon model.
Okay.
And a polygon model is actually like the surface.
So if a camera is reading a photographic image, is that camera figuring out how far away that surface is from it, or is that part of the washing
Yes.
machine?
Yeah, so that's the other thing is, it's
Right,
actually,
calling
if
the
you
washing
go
machine.
back to the Metashape, this is a real meaty picture. So those things that say targets there, those are markers in space that we pre-register all the cameras. And the markers are calibrated to like, you know, I think it's like thousandths of a millimeter or something like that. So you can actually scale whatever you're scanning. So, and we also know where 0 is, because if you're in 3D and modeling and carving, finding 0 it's nice to have, because that's where you start. So
where is
0
the floor?
0 is right under the person, because we
Okay.
set it up that way. I mean, you can always set it later, but what we do in our system is we pre-calibrate it. So when we can just scan a person, 0 is set, there's X, Y, and Z, they're scaled correctly. We know when we export them, they're just going to be a person standing straight up instead of being sideways. So, but the other point is it's scaled, which is, I mean, we're really getting in the weeds here, but you know, but that's, you know, it's important because, you know, if you're scanning 2 people next to each other, you got to know what their relative size is if you're going to put them in the same space. Otherwise, it's a totally random thing.
Yeah. Can the person move while you're scanning them? Or do they stay perfectly still?
So some scanners, yes, you can move. And that's another thing. It's like they have scanners they call them 4D scanners. Microsoft has one where
Okay.
it's actually continually capturing your movement with a different technology. So you can actually be in there and act out a scene, and they actually have like a replicated you in 3D moving. It's like really new technology, and there aren't a ton of ways to utilize it, which is the problem. I mean, like, we're just getting to a point now where, you know, we've been around for a couple years, and we're finally finding a use for our scanner, which is like way simpler than that. So, you know, they've built this incredible technology, but what's the venue?
Yeah.
That's the question.
First of all, is it all right if I interrupt? to
Of
ask a
course,
question? Okay.
please.
I don't want to disrupt you guys, but is that why there's a half a second lag between the projection of the speckle distort, so that there isn't any movement, or to
Yes.
reduce the amount of distance there is between the visual projection and the actual
Yeah.
polygonal?
Ideally, it would be nothing.
Right.
But we have like a hardware restriction. So the cameras have to change aperture, and that takes half a second.
Got it. Right.
So, yeah, I mean, it would be better if it was,
There's nothing.
yeah, because people have to stand still for half a second,
Right.
which is kind of harder than you think. I mean, so what I'll do when I'm capturing someone is I'll usually tell them to hold still, and I'll capture them 5 times while they're trying to hold still and swaying in the wind. And eventually I'll get one, but I mean, so it's not that hard, but it's,
Otherwise, it's more work afterward with the three-dimensional file that you have to work with.
it just doesn't, so what happens then is the texture doesn't align. So that's the thing, so we're creating the mesh with the projection photos, and then we're creating the texture map, which is texture in 3D speak, actually doesn't mean, it means photo overlay.
Right.
It gets very confusing. It doesn't mean texture like you think of it in sculpture. And so if the person isn't still and they move, the texture map doesn't align and people look really disturbing.
So one scan is like the volume, and then another is the texture map.
Exactly.
Is like the photorealistic, like skin that gets draped
Yes,
over that
exactly.
form.
Exactly.
Does the software create those two separately and then combine them for you?
Yes, so we have, so Metashape it's a great software and it allows scripting. So we've scripted everything. So it doesn't do it automatically, but we do it
Okay.
automatically.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's cool, yeah, yeah.
I mean, do we have an image of a texture map? I remember you showing one to me and it.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So
cool.
that is, yeah. That's just like, I mean, a texture map is just a JPEG, so, when you unwrap it from the person, that's what it looks like.
It reminded me
Yeah.
of like chocolate bunny rabbits when you take off the foil and flatten it and it
Right,
has the like
yeah.
printed.
Oh, that's a good one, yeah.
thing on
Mercator
it.
projection.
Yeah.
It also reminded me of how, and there's a lot of points for this kind of analogy, but how this reminded me of mold making, where you're thinking about like a brush up or like applying a skin of something
Mhm.
and backing it up with a volume, and then thinking about like draft and all these kind of things.
Yes.
There's a real like progression of volume understanding with the
Yes.
two things, which I think is really interesting.
Yes, and then, so like, I was never I mean, I feel like I had a good feel as a mold maker, but I always liked to work with people who paid more attention than I did and would take notes, because I knew I was supposed to take notes, but I never liked doing it. But it's like this side of it too, is like the software on the back end of how to manipulate these files. I mean, it is just incredibly complex. And, so once you have a 3D model, then it's like, what do you do with it? And there's a million different things, and everybody we work with has a different workflow and software they use.
Your clients or the people that work with you at Lenscloud?
Our clients.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this obviously is a very complicated machine that you guys built, stemming from this requirement.
It is, and it's simple. I mean, it's really a big camera. I
Can
mean,
you
that's
talk
all
about
it is.
how you
Yeah.
assembled this
Yeah.
big multi-camera camera?
Yeah, so there's one image of the first iteration that's in wood, I think. And so we built the first one. We had looked up this. There's like a website, it's called Pi Scanning 3D or something like that, because we used Raspberry Pis to build this thing.
Which is my favorite description, like equipment description.
Raspberry Pi,
Because I'm
right.
like, sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Wait,
And
it's
if you,
cameras?
yeah, if you don't know, it's a very affordable microcomputer. And they had kind of like an open source thing that was okay, but so I'll pitch my, my third partner, Brett Basler, is Ryan's old buddy. Ryan brought him in, and this is back when I was working for the artists, and this is Brett. And Brett's a software engineer, also brilliant, and he just wanted to write the software, rewrite it himself. And
Does he come from an art background?
he does
too?
not.
He's-
He does not come
yeah.
from an art background. I mean, he makes drawings and, he's very creative, but he's not like a fabricator in the New York art
Yeah.
world. He's from, he actually lives in Seattle and works remote. But he's designed a ton of software for us as a business that automates, because that's a lot of what we've done is automation. So we have taken like a different step. So there's a lot of photogrammetry businesses, but one thing we did, and one thing that was Ryan's early vision, was he wanted to have like a push button 3D scanner. And I was like, that sounds great, but it just sounds so hard. And the two of them.
In that you just click a button and it
spits out a model.
pops out a
Yeah.
three-dimensional
Yes.
texture, everything.
And we built the scanner and it worked, and I saw what kind of went into it in the software. And I mean, even in my head, I thought that was going to be impossible. But But anyways, I'll give Ryan and Brett all the credit is they actually developed software to do this. So, something that, like, if you had an idea to do that and you wanted to hire like an industrial designer and a software engineer and whatever it is exactly I do, you would spend, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. But we were lucky and we were all interested in it, so we just did it together. And the thing that's silly about it right now is that for years we just did events and they were quite lucrative. But somebody would have an idea in like an office saying, wouldn't it be cool if we 3D scanned all the people who came into our trade show booth? And then they would start looking around, and nobody does this, but then we figured out how to do it. So we get these kind of random business inquiries where we go and set up our booth at CES or at a trade show. And
Were you taking this wooden version?
no, we made a metal version by then
Okay.
that was nice and durable for transport. And we just scanned just hundreds and hundreds of people. And then we'd, process the models, and we had a quick little way to rig it and make people dance. I mean, it was like a really fun, oh yeah, that's the scanners all stacked up for transport.
Oh, that's its
Yeah.
portable.
So they all like kind of block together like Legos. But we would do all these events and scan people, and it was fun, but not really what we, I mean, I think it's as fun as the output can be.
I mean, what do you see as like an ideal, if you think about how you'd like to see this kind of file generation used, what would be your ideal?
I mean, I'm actually kind of interested in building more of the scanners and getting people to use them.
Mm-hmm.
So also making the interface a little bit easier, and getting the scanners in the hands of more creatives and institutions and studios so that it can just make one step of creating virtual media more attainable. Because right now it's like, if you want a 3D scan of a person in New York before us, you can do it. I mean, there's a couple places that do it. But then like we came along and we just have like a really kind of easy way to work with, and we're just like a local shop. So we kind of take anybody who comes in and try to work with anyone.
Yeah, I can see some of the big like corporate, you can work with a big corporation, but you can work with like an individual artist too.
Yes.
Like it's not, sometimes this kind of specialized equipment has accessibility issues just for like
Yes.
being able to walk through the door and ask questions.
Well, that's the nice thing about it too. It's like the beautiful thing about a digital camera is that you're never going to run out of film, and that's basically the bones of this thing. So we're not operating a CNC router where there's consumables and massive amounts of electricity. I'm just taking digital pictures, and then we have these scripts. So if I have it set up for auto process and somebody needs a scan, I mean, I'm going to scan them, And it's working with artists especially. We've worked with a lot of students, and it's really satisfying to be able to give somebody something that's worth a lot of money.
How do you talk about what this machine can do when you like meet an artist or an art student? Because it seems, there's a lot of, like with all specialized things, there's a lot of jargon.
Yeah.
But like the concept is pretty simple when you explain it like you just did. Like
Yeah.
what kind of language do you use to get them inspired to like use it in a creative way?
Well, typically, if somebody's coming to me, they know what they're getting into. So it's very rare that I have to like start at the beginning with someone. I mean, if somebody's coming in, they want a 3D file, and they like, can you give me an OBJ? Can you give me an STL? I'm like, yes, and
Yeah.
that's all they want to know. But yeah, when they have questions about doing certain things, I mean, like any fabricator, if you're working with an artist who has an idea and they really want your input on how to make it, it's the same exact way. And I just try to tell people, start with what you want, and then we'll start there and we'll talk about how it would be done. And then you kind of let them in on the process of how the scan works. That might give them other ideas.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like such a great opportunity if it never runs out of film to let artists and creative people like play with this thing.
Yeah, that's the nice thing. So like, it's like a piece of studio equipment. So when somebody comes in for a shoot and pays for a day or whatever, I mean, that's the thing, we'll do captures all day. And then they can look at the photos, and the photos give you all the information the model would. They're just frozen. So they can look at their expression and their posture or whatever they want and decide if it's good before we run it through processing, which takes, some time and resources. So it is nice in that way, is that you actually use the photos as a primer for the project.
Yeah, it's like pretty immediate feedback.
Incredibly immediate. So yeah, I mean, that was the other thing is, Brett designed this too, where the photos download. So you've 120 networked computers on these towers, and we're getting a gig of data out of all those computers in 12 seconds.
Wow.
So we can look at 2 photos from each of those. So I'll do a capture, and within 12 seconds I can look at it. And then the new scanner we're building this fall is going to have gigabit. So I think it'll be 2 seconds. You can look at all those sets.
I mean, you guys specialize in the file generation, and so much of digital fabrication takes so long to turn into an output, to get out into the world as a like CNC routing takes a long time. You have to like set everything up and
Right.
put it back together. It seems like a really nice kind of immediate way to get a feel for the file. Do you guys work with people on the output end of stuff? Do you have like
For sure.
subcontractors that you
Yeah.
recommend with? Like what kind of ways have these files gone out into the world or not? Like been in virtual reality kind of, like how are they used?
Yes, so we've worked with a bunch of fabricators. We work with a 3D printing shop that's fantastic, called Roboto a lot. Rob Steiner started it, and Alyosha, I'm blanking on his last name, but they have a really great service for artists, or if you're looking for like a part made in 3D, they really know their equipment, and that is the nice thing is like and also like some another guy, Neoset, does robotic arm carving. I mean, if somebody does understand how your files come to them, and you can develop a good relationship, it's actually really good for either client, because if we're speaking the same language. But there isn't always, I mean, we do, I guess, a fair amount of work that is going to go back to physical in some way, but we also do a lot of work that stays digital.
Yeah, there were some great like models using scans
Oh,
that
yeah.
were moving.
Oh, this is the, we sold a scanner to MIT, and this is the design. And we reconfigured it for like more of a studio approach where it could be kind of collapsed easier and moved around. And we could also add additional cameras to up the overall resolution.
How big can that circle of cameras go? Could you?
Well, that's the nice thing about it, is it can wheel any size. I mean,
Okay.
they wanted it specifically for avatars, but you could scan a couch in it or whatever you want.
Could you scan a house?
So that's
Sorry, this is where the
interesting.
question
You
starts. I'm like,
can.
what about an elephant?
You could, but then there's like, you get into photogrammetry, it's like really the best thing to scan a house would be to fly a drone around it.
Oh,
Yeah.
to move the camera
Yeah.
around.
Then building like $1 billion 3D scanning rig.
Gotcha. And there now are scanners that you could do with the drone?
Well, yeah, so I mean, it's just photos. So if you're capturing something that's not gonna move,
Mm-hmm.
then you can just take pictures of it. And I actually use that quite a lot, because sometimes if you're out in the field, or sometimes an object needs just like a different level of care with a different type of camera.
Uh-huh.
And I'll just take a bunch of pictures of it, and you have to run it through the software manually.
Wow. So as long as it can agree on the point in space, it can find the three-dimensional.
Yeah, I mean, you can use your iPhone.
How do you set 0 with an iPhone?
That doesn't, I mean, you can always do that later.
Okay.
That whole, example was really about auto processing, how we do it automatically.
Yeah.
You can definitely do that retroactively.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I'd love to see those, for stuff that doesn't go back into the physical.
Oh, yeah,
The kind
there's
of manipulation that can happen with the files.
The
some of
videos,
The
yeah.
videos of, I think there was like
It's
one
like
where
me,
someone was
like-
getting things thrown at them, yeah.
kind of bouncing around, yeah. Yeah, Brett will like take scans of me and torture me. Some of this is on her Instagram, I
So
think.
this is like the texture map in an inflatable.
Yeah, yeah. So my
Existing in like a virtual space that has like rules to it.
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can, so once you have a polygon model, you can just change the property of the material, and so he made me an inflatable and made my head sink in. Here's another one. That's Brett right there. And then I think Ryan and I are gonna be dancing. There's me, belly dancing. There's Ryan doing something cool.
So the movement in this, they're not scanning you dancing in the machine. They're
No.
scanning you standing still, and then they're manipulating you in virtual reality.
Yeah, so we, yeah, yes, exactly.
There's your
That
really
sounds
good
like,
dancer right
Yeah,
there.
yeah. So Brett always makes me belly dance. It's pretty funny. You can, so we just like pull out all the easiest tricks we can, and one of them is Mixamo. That's Brett also. It's a scan on a skateboard. That was a good one. Mixamo is Adobe, and it's free. So we make our models so they immediately can import into Mixamo, and you can rig it and make it do like tons of dances.
do
So-
people use that? Do your
Well, so,
clients use
so
that a
what
lot,
we
or-
do, actually what we're doing this Saturday, if you're interested, is you can come to the new lab, show up at 6 because the line gets huge. We can only scan probably 200 people, and there's 3,000 who show up to this thing. But we'll scan you, and then we'll make you do like a break dancing backflip or something. Send it to you in a link. So,
Can you talk a little bit about being part of New Lab, because it
Yes.
seems like such a great community, and like how it fits in with the contemporary art world, because you kind of have a foot in a lot of different
Yeah.
worlds.
Yeah, so New Lab was amazing. We really, I feel like, are still lucky to be there, especially, I mean, I think we fit really well into their criteria for companies, but typically, and I might be wrong about this now, but a lot of their companies have or are actively raising money, and being kind of a bootstrap business that has developed the technology but is also in service is a little bit uninvestable in some ways to some venture capitalists. We're not letting it get us down. But no, they've been like a huge support network. So New Lab has, I think it's over 130 companies now, and of totally varying sizes. And it's been really different. I mean, from being in the art world for 10 years and then going into like tech and hardware manufacturing and software. I mean, it is very different. So there's all these people that are kind enough to, tell me when I'm doing something stupid. So,
Do you guys do you like trade clients and stuff? Is there like a community
Absolutely,
of,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
passing around? It's
Yeah,
like,
no.
I do file generation, you need a file generated for, I mean, I know there's like a company in there that
It
does
is-
some mushroom growing.
yes,
Like,
it's a place of goodwill. I mean, for sure. I mean, everybody kind of wants to help each other, and there's lots of introductions going on, and there's definitely collaboration between companies there. We're working with some companies, to do different projects. I mean, nothing, huge, I guess, has quite come out of it yet, but I don't necessarily expect that. I mean, I guess the bigger thing is that, of like, when you're a small company and your co-founders are working remote, it's nice to have a workspace where you can relate to people. It's not quite like a WeWork, because it's a bit more curated, and there's a lot of just general collaboration there. It's a nice place to be, it really is.
like, how do you see this? I mean, it's hard I know it's hard to answer, like, how do you see this technology being used? Because it's almost like you made it, and then
Yes.
you want the world to answer that question
Yes,
for
yeah,
you.
yeah.
But, like, how do you see it kind of fitting back into your history with contemporary art? Like, do you want it to?
Mhm.
Do you see it growing out of that and not turning back?
I mean, I think, you're talking about problem solving earlier, and I think the thing that I saw 3 years ago was a big problem of like, oh my God, 3D scanning in New York just sucks. Like, there's not many options, it seems overpriced. And when we built this machine, and that Ryan and Brett slaved over for a few months, I couldn't believe how easy it was to use, like, after struggling to generate 3D models for so long. And granted, we have work to do to make it better, but like the idea of it being a tool like any other tool.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, I think for us, like we're kind of going towards retail a lot because there's money there, and to survive, I think that's where we're going to want to be.
Uh-huh.
But at the same time, you know, I look at if we can develop it more, it can be used for all sorts of things we've never even thought of. I mean,
Yeah,
as
I mean,
well.
I've heard conversations about how great it would be to use it for specialty crate building. If you have a large sculpture, you could
Yes.
scan it and then build a perfect fit for it.
That is like another thing. So that's like another thing about 3D scanning is there's a lot of different equipment out there, and our scanner is really good at what it's good at, which is scanning people quickly, and it's easy to use. But then to that point, there's other equipment that is better at other things, like handheld scanners.
Yeah.
And so I also see it as like something, but yeah, all the scanners, you know, to what you're saying, like they all work together. Like we're actually buying more scanners that aren't our scanners so that we can be more dynamic in the service industry. So we bought two, they're called Artec, is the kind of leading handheld 3D scanning business. They're very expensive scanners, but we bought two of them so that when we have somebody come in for a service job, we can not just take care of, you know, scanning their, you know, their bodies, but we could scan their shoes if they need it or something else. Or if we have a client who needs us to run on site, we don't have to move the scanner that weighs a couple thousand pounds. We can just bring a suitcase. So I think that there's kind of a place for all of it. And I mean, what's really amazing too is that in the past even 2 to 3 months, we have just gotten so much more interest from what I was expecting 2 years ago.
Yeah.
That nobody was calling about. And
Do you think it's people just knowing that you exist or being familiar with
I think it's
this technology?
I think it's a mixture. I mean, I think that there's a real, like, all the hardware is accepting 3D a lot easier, so larger companies are thinking that they need to utilize 3D, and everything's just getting, like, easier. Everything's just kind of locking into place.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like we've talked, kind of hearing that there's like a familiarity growing, just with your business, but like generally out there, we've talked about fabrication and like the idea of kind of post-industrial fabrication.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, in conversations, that term has been used as like the actual process is no longer industrial, like boat building or forging or, you know,
Mhm.
these kind of like industrial processes, but has become digital. But we've had conversations about it also in that in contemporary art fabrication, it's coming away from an artist hires a cabinet maker to produce an industrial object to an artist talks to another artist who's good at this thing, and they talk to their friend, and then it's a digital service. It's become, like the industrial production line has disappeared from fabrication, both on a material level, but also on like an interpersonal level. Can you talk a little bit about your thoughts about that change into like post-industrial?
Yeah, I mean, well, you know, working with artists is such a pain, but but I love it. You know, I mean, they're the best at what they do with materials, and they make our business way better, for sure. So it's something I will always do. But yeah, I mean, it is quite different because the artists too they're excited about it. They kind of don't know how to wrap their head around it. But I like how you can kind of dip your toe in, you can try something, and it's not going to kill you, you know. That's what I like about 3D is it gives you like a preparation to a project. And the way I see a lot of artists working much more typically now is going from 3D model, whether it's scanned or built, and then into some sort of digital fabrication, which would be robotic arm carving, 3D printing, and those processes, I mean, there are studios that are supported by completely by artists, but a 3D scanning studio doing only artist work, I don't know if that's going to survive or not. I mean, it's a little bit,
I mean, would you want it to, or do you like having the different, you know, the kind of like difficult to work with but fun to experiment and the kind of steady?
Yeah, well, I think one helps the other for sure. I
Yeah.
mean, every bit of development we do for, you know, for corporations doing like high volume scanning is certainly going to help artists. I mean, we're like a Kinko's, you know.
Yeah.
I was just saying this actually on the way here I was talking to an Uber driver who was asking me all about it, and I just realized like we are really just a new type of Kinko's, and we're just, you bring your thing in and we make copies of it. So
Yeah.
sometimes we're doing it for, you know, Dunder Mifflin, and sometimes we're doing it for, you know.
Do you have like an ideal client,
Carrot Top.
like art?
That's right. Yeah.
An ideal art, like is there an artist you'd love to work with, living or dead?
Oh
Like-
my God, that's a good question. Oof. I mean, there's artists I'd like to work with, but it sounds like torture too. I mean, that's a tough question. I don't have to think about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you guys have any questions you want to jump in on? Front row. Oh, wait, I think we have a microphone. Hold on. We can mic you.
You started the conversation speaking about the project that got this all going.
Yep.
And there was kind of loose talk about it, but I think might have taken a sideways turn.
Uh-huh.
Can you speak to that project that initiated all this and really kind of, you know, made this the, oh, this is why I need to do this?
Yes. Yes, so I worked with an artist, and I won't name him because I don't think he wants to be named, but anyways, I signed a nice NDA before I went into his studio, so I'll just keep quiet about it. But he was a wonderful guy, and he was very creative and willing to take a risk, a big risk, by building a scanner and trusting me and Ryan and Brett to get it done, which was really cool of him.
The artist was just like, you can't find the service, you're interested, you guys should just give it a shot.
He just was like tired of doing it. He just wanted it.
Yeah.
I think he just wanted it enough, and it sounded so magical. And I honestly, like, I've worked with Ryan a lot, and I didn't know Brett at the time, but Ryan is fantastic, and he's certainly one of the most capable people I've ever met. And he's also just really, he's got such a diverse set of skills. He can fabricate most anything, but he's also really good on CNCs as an operator, machine operator, and he was an electrician. I mean, he really was like the perfect guy to do this. Plus, he's obsessive. So he was work, you know, the whole time. So like one funny thing about it was Ryan, first of all, Ryan's a really big, strong guy, you know, he's like 6'5", and he's also like careful with money. We got a really low bid on this, so he decided he was going to make all the Ethernet cables for the scanner, which is a ton of Ethernet cables. It was over 100 Ethernet cables.
What do you mean, make them?
Meaning take the cord, splice it, cut it, and like solder it in or whatever.
Okay.
And he's got the biggest hands you've ever seen. Have you ever seen an Ethernet cable? But anyways, he's really dexterous, and he made every Ethernet cord, every power cord, just because he can. And I think he regretted it a little bit at the end.
Didn't you cast? Didn't you mold and cast?
So
sections
that
of it?
first one, we actually built it out of wood. We just
Okay.
cut it on a CNC router.
So the second one was.
The second one, so we made the first one, and it was like, we were all like in love. We were like, this is so cool, let's do something with this.
And
Like,
that was the one for the artist project.
the wooden one was for the artist project. And then the metal one, we said, we gotta like tighten this thing up and make it more durable so we can take it on the road. So Ryan designed the sheet metal components, and he also designed these end caps. And then I cast them in,
By hand.
by hand. I mean, I've cast them so many times.
How many
And
of those do you think you've made?
well, so, oh my God, I mean, this is like R&D, you know, the first one you make, you use the wrong material, and then they start shattering. And you're like, okay, I guess I'll do that again. And then you make it again, and then you send it off to CES, and on the way back, they drop the crate off a loading dock, and then you gotta make another 40. So, anyways,
Yay, small business.
yeah, right, exactly. But there's a really nice mechanism that fits in. I mean, it's a really clever thing that Ryan designed where the cap fits in, it protects the scanner. It also accepts a carriage bolt that you can tighten up from one knob. So it's really easy to stand up the towers. And also it has these Lego-like notches so that when you're moving it around on dollies or four wheels or whatever you call them, you can stack them and you know they're not gonna like slip off. And it also keeps them kind of separated so the cameras don't get damaged. And it's, I mean, you know, we've taken it now to Boston, to Florida, to Vegas, to San Francisco, and like all over New York. And
It
it's,
just fits in the van and you guys.
yeah, it fits in like a 10-foot U-Haul, and it's, you know, it's still standing, still works, so it's going okay.
And were you guys rapid prototyping hardware?
So we 3D printed all of the camera mounts. Ryan designed those as well. Oh yeah, there we go. And there's a bunch of iterations of those, and that, I mean, that is like also something that just, I mean, still blows my mind. I know now it's kind of like old news, but when we were making this, and we could just do that, I mean, it was so cool. I mean, just like coming from
When was this?
well, this was 3 years ago. This is,
Yeah.
I feel like when like,
It's crazy how
it was
fast this moves.
just when 3D printers were getting like a little bit more reliable. But the fact that we could, you know, Ryan could design these things, we could prototype it a million times. I mean, there would have been no way to do this 10 years ago, really.
And what version are you on now of the whole rig?
This will be I think it's the 5th one,
Fifth.
yeah.
What version did you, as a group company, whether you were a company headed or not
Mhm.
at that point, what version were you like, this is bigger than just successfully building a project for this one artist? At what point were you like, this has potential to be its own?
Well, I'd been
thing?
thirsty to start my own business for years and been bugging Ryan about starting a CNC fabrication business because he was really good at that and
Yeah.
I was interested in doing my own thing. But we talked about it a lot and it just seemed miserable. I mean, you know, I was not into the waste of it, and also it's competitive, and I just did
It's a
not
lot, yeah.
feel like up for that kind of fight. I think a CNC is a great complement to a business, but to just buy a CNC and build a business didn't make sense. So when we built this thing, I mean, it was just, I mean, imagine that you're like looking for something for 6 months and you looking high and low and you're talking to experts and it doesn't exist. And then you build it and it works. It was like, I mean, I didn't build it, but Brett and Ryan really designed it and built it. I mean, I had my 2 cents in, but you know, it was like, oh, this is really cool. That we can do something with this. And then so we just jumped in, and of course, I mean, it was a disaster. I mean, we didn't know what we were doing. It took years. Yep.
One follow-up. You mentioned a bit of R&D going on, and then you also mentioned what the artist who you had initially
Yep.
made this for thought, this sounds magical.
Yes.
Was it magical, the finished product that first time, or did it take many more iterations?
The scanner worked great right away.
Was the artist like happy and said, wow, this is fantastic, you guys nailed it?
Yeah, he was
All
very
right.
happy. I think he was very happy,
Yeah.
you know.
Any other questions?
I've never heard that before.
I know, that's a
No, I'm like,
rare
I'm
thing
like,
in
you
fabrication.
just said that. It doesn't register. Really?
Well, I mean, I think if you're essentially building a tool, not an artwork, and there's difference. It's like if the tool does the job it's assigned, it's a much more straightforward desire to fulfill than making a finished artwork.
Well, also imagine this, right? So, and this was like kind of the workflow I'll let in, is that we could take a scan of someone, and we had a CNC router, and we could take a scan, and then within less than a day, we could have a foam replica of that person. And I thought that is really cool. I mean, you just can't do that unless you have all those things in place.
Yeah.
So if you're an artist and you want to run through figurative poses really quickly, you know, and you got a lot of jingle, I mean, there's no other way to go.
Yeah.
Is that you, are you able to prototype those yourself, or do you have to send those out?
The camera mounts?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we have a 3D printer.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, they're dirt cheap now. I mean, you can get them for, I mean, you know, relatively speaking, it's $1,000. You can get a really nice one.
Is your scanning technology the one that's at Duke by any chance?
So Dube uses photogrammetry, But the difference between us and Doob is Doob actually has nicer cameras.
What is Doob? Just
Doob is so a lot of photogrammetry scanners, there's a bunch of companies that are great. There's Doob, there's Twindom, what else? There's a bunch of them. Anyways, and their whole business is they do the same thing we're doing, but instead of having a digital model that dances, they just give you a little 3D print of yourself.
oh, like the stores. that
Yes.
you can- Okay.
It's like a 3D portrait.
Mm-hmm.
So Doob uses, DSLR cameras, and we use like Sony cell phone cameras. So we have a lot of software and our own trickery to make the cell phone cameras adequate for what we do.
Does that make your rig more affordable to build?
Well, so you can imagine, like, our cameras, I think they cost $35, maybe even $25. They're pretty
Oh,
cheap.
it's huge.
Yeah. And a
Yeah.
DSLR camera is,
Yes.
yeah. But
Could
then.
you plug a DSLR camera into your?
Well, so that's the new scanner we're gonna merge, so we'll have like a hybrid of, we'll use the DSLRs for high-resolution textures, but the models are fine. I mean, that's the thing about 3D that we didn't really get into, because there is so much to get into, but one of the biggest things with a 3D model, if you're using it and keeping it in digital, is called retopology. And that basically means you're taking all those polygons and you're organizing them in a more efficient way so that there's less excess data. Because you have to imagine, as good as computers and phones are getting, if you have a model and it has 300,000 polygons, it's not gonna move very well. But then, so you wanna get it down to like a couple thousand polygons. And there's an art to that as well. But my point is that using a full DSLR rig, you'll get more polygons and higher resolution, but to what end? For us. So if you're only using it for instance, they're using it for these 3D prints that are pretty low res. They could use our scanner and the
Yeah,
models
it's a
would
bit
be.
excessive, isn't it, then at that point?
It is, but
They also will sell you the scan for like a lot of money.
for like $1,000 it used to be.
Wow.
But see, the difference is, so the way we built it, we needed Brett and Ryan, who are actually pretty unique. And the way they built it was with photography equipment. So they just have, I don't exactly know how they have it, but they basically have a bunch of cameras and synchronizers, and it's just photography. It's just a bunch of cameras taking a picture at the same time.
Do you guys have a patent on?
We have patent pending.
Okay.
Yeah.
Curious.
I hope so by the end of the year. We'll
Yeah.
see.
So if your new version has the ability to have a few DSLR cameras in
Yep.
the grouping?
Yep.
Those could like focus on certain areas for a
Yeah,
higher-
that's the idea too. So like overall better texture, but the idea too is we want to mess around with like, what if you just want a high resolution scan of your face?
Mhm.
Maybe we can do that too with just because 25 cameras isn't really, we actually don't know what's going to happen because we're building it for the first time. Because it's a
Yeah.
lot of, we're talking about, we're going to buy, it's $20,000 cameras and lenses. So it's like, it's kind of a expensive experiment.
Yeah.
But we know enough at this point, and we've done some tests that we're confident that it will work. How well, we don't know.
Do you feel like the real, after all this research and like seeing how other people are using the technology systems, do you feel like your value is in the software that you guys have developed for kind of making these polygons move easier or processing directly, like wrapping and all that
Mhm.
stuff? Or do you think it's in the camera, the physical?
I think it's both.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's kind of, I think they really work nicely together. And that's, I answered that question maybe differently, but, I use the thing all the time, and it's a really nice piece of hardware. It's designed well. And the software also has come a long way, so.
I mean, having it mobile is seems like a key point of hardware.
Yeah, no, having it kind of simple to set up will be, the nice thing, like, I'll do a shoot in a day. It's a long day, but I can come in, I can set it up, capture, and I can leave. Again, it's miserable. I really try not to do that, but there's not a photogrammetry rig of this
Yeah.
quality like in town. Like typically photogrammetry rigs take at least a day to set up, just to set up.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit to, I'm not like totally sure myself on the specifics, but the data ownership around these 3D scans?
That
and
is a
if
great
that's
question.
a user, like at a free event?
Yeah.
Do they sign something? Do you keep the scans? Like,
Yes.
what happens?
Yes, so we have a release that the person checks at the events now. It depends also. So if somebody's hiring us to scan, they own the scans because that's what they're paying for. I don't know what they do with them, but they own them, and they usually have a release too. If we're scanning, we own the scans. You know, we're not, obviously, you know, we want to be as ethical as possible because it is serious. I mean, we take it very seriously. And, you know, we are super secure with our data too, you know, all that's offline. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting territory for sure. I mean, I think other countries are much more kind of crazy about it. In the States, it's like a bit of a free-for-all. I mean, I will say with our scanner right now, it's not like you know, you couldn't make a deep fake that's really reasonable unless it's from a distance, I guess.
And a deepfake is like manipulating a scan of someone in a way.
Yeah, it would just be like creating a fake rendition of someone doing something that they never did.
Yeah.
Or saying something that they never said. So, yeah, I mean, it's something we think about it a lot, and it's, you know, it's a big legal question. So, when somebody's coming to our scanner and they're getting a scan, they get the scan, we get the data, I guess. I mean, the data is valuable too. I mean, we can use that to make our scanner better or develop AI for, you know, auto rigging or whatever we can do with it. I think that, you know, that's sort of part of the deal for participants, and it's definitely, if people are uncomfortable with it, then I understand it, you know. And of course, if somebody was paranoid about their data and they wanted me to erase it, I would just erase it. I mean, I'm not interested in like fighting with anyone or making anyone uncomfortable. It is tricky. I mean, I wish I had like really hard answers, but I think this is something that's just going to unfold.
Anyone else? Okay.
Have you ever scanned anybody's body for a replacement body part, like a prosthetic?
I have not done that, but it is done a lot, for sure. There's a company in Baltimore called Direct Dimensions. It's like the biggest 3D scanning business on the East Coast, and they have like a doctor's office in their scanning like lab. People come and get prosthetics made because they have like every single piece of scanning equipment you could think of. It is really, it's amazing. It's amazing.
Awesome. Thanks you guys so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Nobody's sleeping, so that's a good sign.